In the quiet suburbs where the streets curved like forgotten whispers, and the houses stood with their lights dimming early against the evening sky, there lived a woman named Elena. She was the kind of teacher who slipped into her students' lives like a soft breeze through an open window. Gentle, unassuming, with a voice that wrapped around words like a lullaby. Her classroom was at Willowbrook High, a place where the chalk dust hung in the air like old memories, and the blackboards bore the faint scars of equations long solved. Elena had been there for 12 years, teaching literature to juniors who stumbled through Shakespeare with half-closed eyes and dreams of summer still clinging to their skin. She was 38, with hair the color of autumn leaves after the first frost, falling in loose waves that she often tucked behind her ear when she leaned over a desk to murmur encouragement. Her eyes, a deep hazel that caught the light just so, held a warmth that made her students linger after the bell, asking questions not about sonnets but about life, about the ache of growing up too fast. Elena had always wanted love, the kind that bloomed slow and steady, like the wild roses that climbed the trellis outside her small cottage on Elm Street. Not the frantic kind that poets chased in fevered verses, but something rooted, something that grew with the seasons. Her days were filled with the rhythm of lesson plans and grading papers under the glow of a single lamp, her evenings with chamomile tea and the distant hum of crickets from the garden. She'd had lovers before, a brief spark with a colleague who left for the city, a summer romance that faded like footprints in the sand, but none had stayed. None had seen the quiet hunger in her, the way she yearned for someone to share the weight of ordinary days. So she poured that longing into her teaching, into the stories she read aloud, her voice rising and falling like the tide, drawing her students into worlds where love was both salvation and sorrow. It was in the fall of her 13th year at Willowbrook that Alex came into her class. He was 17, tall and lean with the awkward grace of someone still unfolding, his dark hair falling across his forehead in a way that made him brush it back absent-mindedly during lectures. He sat in the back row, by the window where the afternoon sun slanted in golden bars, casting shadows that danced across his notebook. Alex wasn't like the others. He didn't fidget or whisper or stare at his phone under the desk. He listened, really listened. His eyes, a stormy gray that seemed to hold secrets from some far-off place, fixed on her when she spoke of Jane Eyre's fire or Gatsby's green light across the bay. And in those moments, Elena felt seen, not as the teacher with the stack of essays, but as the woman who still believed in the ache of unspoken words. At first, it was nothing more than that flicker of connection, the kind that happens in classrooms 1,000 times over. She'd catch him after class, handing back a paper with a note scribbled in the margin. "Your insights here are profound. Keep chasing those shadows." He'd smile, a small, crooked thing that lit something in his face, and murmur a thank you that lingered in the air like the scent of rain on pavement. Over weeks, those moments stretched. He'd stay late to discuss Orwell's warnings about love twisted into control, his voice low and thoughtful, quoting lines she'd only skimmed in her own hurried reading. Elena found herself preparing for those talks, choosing books that echoed her own quiet longings, stories of forbidden glances and hearts that beat too loud in the silence. Winter came softly that year, blanketing the town in a hush of snow that muffled the world outside. The holidays approached, and with them, the annual literature club meeting in the school library, where strings of fairy lights twinkled against shelves bowed under the weight of forgotten tomes. Alex showed up, one of only a handful of students who braved the cold for poetry readings and hot cider. They sat side by side on worn armchairs, knees almost touching as she read from Elizabeth Barrett Browning, her voice weaving through "How Do I Love Thee?" with a tenderness that made the room feel smaller, warmer. He leaned in after, his breath visible in the chill, and said, "It's not just the words, is it? It's the way they make you feel, like you're not alone in wanting more. Elena nodded, her heart a soft drum in her chest, and for the first time in years she wondered if this was the beginning of something, a thread pulling her toward light. But love, when it creeps in uninvited, doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. It starts in the small things, a glance held too long across a crowded hallway, the way her hand brushed his when passing a book, the electric pause that followed. Elena told herself it was harmless, that she was simply mentoring a bright young mind, fostering the spark that could carry him far. Yet in the quiet of her cottage, as snow tapped against the panes like insistent fingers, she replayed their conversations, savoring the timbre of his laugh, the intensity in his eyes when he spoke of dreams deferred. She began to notice how he dressed, the faded blue sweater that hugged his shoulders, the silver chain around his neck that caught the light when he turned his head. It was innocent, she thought, this admiration. A teacher seeing potential, nothing more. Spring unfurled with its tentative greens, and the line began to blur, soft as the mist rising from the river that wound through town. Alex started leaving notes in her mailbox at school, slips of paper folded into careful squares, with quotes from Dickinson or Frost, always ending with a question. "What do you think it means to love without fear?" She'd read them in the staff lounge, her coffee growing cold, a flush creeping up her neck that had nothing to do with the steam. One afternoon after the last bell, he lingered by her desk, the room emptying around them like a sigh. "Miss Harper," he said, using her name like a secret, "I wrote something for the club, but maybe for you." He slid a poem across the wood, his fingers lingering on the edge. It was raw, aching, lines about a light in the window on stormy nights, a voice that called him home. Elena's breath caught. She read it there under the fluorescent hum, and when she looked up, his eyes were on her, searching, pleading. That night she couldn't sleep. The cottage felt too empty, the walls echoing with the ghost of his words. She paced the kitchen in her robe, the floorboards creaking underfoot, and poured a glass of wine that tasted like regret. What harm in a reply, she thought. A note of her own, tucked into his returned essay, praising his gift, encouraging his voice. But as her pen scratched across the page, the words spilled deeper. "Your poem touched something in me I thought was long buried. Thank you for reminding me that beauty still hides in the shadows." She sealed it, heart pounding, and the next day watched from afar as he found it, his face breaking into that crooked smile that now haunted her dreams. The obsession didn't announce itself. It seeped in like dawn through curtains you forgot to close. Alex began seeking her out more, waiting by her car after school with questions about college applications, his presence a steady warmth against the chill of early mornings. They'd walk to the parking lot together, the gravel crunching softly under their shoes, talking of books and ambitions until the lot emptied and the sky bruised purple. Elena felt alive in those moments, the years of solitude cracking like thin ice under sun. She started dressing differently, a scarf in soft cashmere, earrings that swayed when she turned, small vanities she'd abandoned long ago. Her friends noticed, teasing her over lunch about a secret suitor, but she laughed it off, the sound light but edged with something sharper. One evening, as rain pattered against the classroom windows like impatient tears, Alex stayed late to help shelve books from a unit on romantic tragedies. The air smelled of old paper and wet earth, and as they reached for the same volume of Wuthering Heights, their hands met on the spine. Time stretched, the drop of a book somewhere distant the only sound. "Elena," he whispered, her name slipping from him like a confession, and she didn't correct him. Instead, she held his gaze, the world narrowing to the space between them, charged and fragile. When he leaned in, hesitant as a question, she met him halfway, their lips brushing in a kiss that tasted of forbidden ink and longing held too long. It was brief, a spark in the dimming light, but it ignited something irreversible, a flame that warmed and consumed in equal measure. From there, the secrecy wove them tighter. Stolen moments in empty hallways, texts sent after dark that glowed on her phone like embers. Thinking of your voice reading those lines tonight. Can't stop. Elena replied in kind, her thumbs flying over the screen in the hush of her bed, words flowing like water over stones, poems unfinished, dreams shared in fragments. She knew the risks, the chasm of years and roles that yawned between them, but in the quiet hours, doubt felt distant, a shadow she could outrun. Alex was her secret garden, blooming in the cracks of her routine, and she tended it with care, unaware how roots could strangle as they grew. Summer arrived with its lazy heat, school doors locked against the world, but their connection didn't fade. It deepened in the absence. He drove to her cottage one humid afternoon, the engine of his old pickup rumbling like a heartbeat down Elm Street. She met him on the porch, barefoot in a sundress that fluttered like wings, and they talked for hours on the swing that creaked under their weight. About his fractured home, a father gone and a mother lost in her own grief, about her own losses, the fiancé who'd left her at the altar with nothing but a note and a ring that still sat in a drawer. Vulnerability bridged them, turning whispers into promises. That night, as fireflies blinked in the yard like hesitant stars, they crossed another line, bodies entwining in the soft glow of her bedroom lamp, the world outside forgotten in the rhythm of breath and touch. But obsession is a quiet thief stealing pieces until the whole is hollowed. Alex began to change, subtle at first. The way his texts grew more frequent, insistent, pulling her from sleep with questions of when they'd meet next. "I need you," he'd write at midnight, and she'd soothe him with replies, her own heart twisting with the weight of it. He followed her routines, appearing at the coffee shop where she graded papers, his smile bright but his eyes shadowed with something possessive. Elena dismissed it as youth's fervor, the intensity of first love, but unease stirred like silt in still water. She pulled back, gently canceling a planned weekend drive, citing lesson prep. But he persisted, leaving wildflowers on her doorstep, notes pressed between petals. "You're my everything. Don't leave me in the dark." Fall returned, classes resuming with the scent of sharpened pencils and fresh rain. In the classroom, the air thickened. Alex's gaze burned from the back row, a heat that made her falter mid-sentence. Other students noticed, whispering about the way he hovered after bell, the flush on her cheeks when she called his name for attendance. Elena built walls, assigning group projects to dilute their time alone, avoiding the library club's poetry nights, but cracks formed. One evening, as she locked her classroom door, he was there, waiting in the shadowed hall, his face pale under the flickering bulb. "Why are you pulling away?" he demanded, voice cracking like thin glass. She reached for calm, for the teacher she'd been, but his hand gripped her arm, fingers digging in with a desperation that chilled her. "I love you, Elena. You can't just stop." She freed herself, words tumbling soft but firm. "This has to end, Alex. It's not right. You're my student." But he didn't hear or wouldn't. His eyes darkened, storm clouds gathering, and he turned away with a murmur that echoed. "You'll see. You need me as much as I need you." That night, sleep evaded her, the cottage's silence oppressive, broken only by the wind rattling branches like accusations. She replayed the grip of his hand, the fervor in his voice, and wondered when admiration had twisted into chains. The obsession bloomed dark now, petals curling inward. Flowers turned to shadows, untraceable calls that breathed her name into the receiver before clicking dead. Emails from anonymous accounts quoting her own words back at her, twisted into pleas. Alex's presence loomed. He'd park his truck down the street from school, watching her arrive with coffee in hand, his silhouette a ghost in the dawn light. In class, his essays shifted from lyrical beauty to fevered warnings, tales of love that devoured, of women who fled only to be pulled back by invisible threads. Elena graded them with trembling hands, her notes clipped and distant, but he cornered her after, voice low. "You read it. You know what happens when you run." Fear crept in slow, a fog that muffled her days. She confided in no one, not her principal with his distracted nods, nor her friend Clara who lived too far for late-night calls. Instead, she fortified, changed her phone number, installed a lock on her garden gate, drove different routes home. But Alex adapted, a shadow learning her shapes. One rainy Tuesday, as thunder grumbled overhead, she found him in her cottage, door jimmied, the air thick with the scent of his cologne. He sat at her kitchen table, a half-eaten apple in hand, smiling as if it were the most natural thing. "I couldn't wait any more," he said, standing slow, his eyes tracing her like a map he'd memorized. "We belong together, forever." Her heart hammered, but she kept her voice even, a thread of steel beneath the calm. "Leave, Alex, now. This isn't love, it's something broken." He stepped closer, the knife from her block glinting in his other hand, not raised, but there, a silent threat in the downpour's roar. "You made me this way," he whispered, the words a blade of their own. "Your words, your touch, they woke this in me. You can't abandon it." Time fractured then, the room spinning in fragments. The tick of the clock, rain lashing windows, his breath ragged as he reached for her. She backed away, mind racing for escape, but he lunged, the struggle a blur of limbs and cries swallowed by storm. In the chaos, instinct surged, her elbow connecting with his jaw, the knife skittering across tile. She bolted for the door, feet slipping on wet floors, bursting into the night where lightning etched the sky in silver veins. Neighbors' lights flickered on, distant shouts piercing the gale, and Alex followed, silhouette ragged against the glow. "Elena!" he called, voice breaking like waves on rock, but she ran, lungs burning, until blue lights swirled at the street's end. Someone had called, seen the shadow chasing light. The aftermath unfolded in layers, slow as healing scars. Police statements in sterile rooms, the scent of coffee gone bitter. Alex's arrest, his eyes hollow as they led him away, mouthing words she couldn't bear to hear. The school suspended her pending review, whispers rippling through halls like smoke. Elena retreated to her cottage, boarding windows against ghosts, but sleep came fitful, haunted by what-ifs and the echo of his voice reading her favorite lines. Love, she'd thought, was the gentle pull of gravity. Obsession, she learned, was the crush of black holes, devouring all in its path. Months blurred into a tentative thaw. Therapy sessions in a sunlit office, where a kind-faced woman coaxed out the shards, guilt for the spark she'd fanned, fear for the darkness it birthed. Elena resigned from Willowbrook, the letter typed with steady hands but sent with a sigh that carried 12 years' weight. She moved to a coastal town, where the sea whispered constants against the shore, and took up tutoring in a small library, voices soft over dog-eared pages. Letters came from Alex's mother, apologies scrawled in shaky script, updates on his time in juvenile holding, the therapy he raged against but slowly bent to. Forgiveness wasn't a wave crashing clean. It ebbed and flowed, leaving shells of questions on the sand. Yet in quiet evenings, as salt air filled her lungs and gulls wheeled overhead, Elena found threads of herself rewoven. She wrote again, not notes in margins, but stories of her own, tales of women who walked lines and emerged scarred but standing. Love, she penned in a journal by candlelight, was not possession but release, a hand extended then withdrawn to let another fly. And sometimes, in the hush before dawn, she'd dream of that classroom, the boy with storm-gray eyes, and wake with an ache that softened into understanding. We all cross lines, seeking light, but the truest path is the one we choose to step back from whole. But wait, the story doesn't end so neatly, does it? Life, like the sea she now called home, has currents that pull unexpected. One crisp autumn morning, as leaves skittered across the pier like errant thoughts, a package arrived at her door unmarked, wrapped in brown paper that crinkled under her fingers. Inside, a book, her copy of Wuthering Heights, pages dog-eared at the passages of Heathcliff's Rage, a single rose pressed between wilted but red as accusation. No note, but she knew. Alex released on good behavior, his 18th birthday a key turning in locks she'd thought permanent. Her hands trembled as she closed the cover, the weight of it heavier than memory. She didn't call the police that time. Caution had taught her vigilance, not panic. Instead, she burned the rose in a tin on the porch, watching flames lick petals to ash, the smoke curling skyward like a prayer unanswered. Days turned to weeks, the town's rhythm a balm, morning walks where waves lapped at pebbles, evenings with locals sharing stories over cider that warmed from within. Elena dated tentatively, a fisherman with laugh lines and calloused hands who spoke of tides and not tempests. But shadows lingered, glances over shoulders at strangers who moved too deliberate. Then the letters began, not through post but slipped under doors or left on her car windshield, typed missives in plain envelopes recounting their moments with a precision that chilled. The swings creak, the rain on that fatal night, her voice saying his name in the dark. "I dream of you still," one read. "The way you made me feel alive. We'll find our way back." She changed locks again, varied her routes, but he was a ghost with feet, appearing at the library's edge, browsing shelves just out of sight. His reflection in windows a flicker she caught from the corner of her eye. Fear, once a fog, sharpened to a blade. Elena confided in the fisherman, Mark, his brow furrowing as he listened, arm around her shoulders a anchor in the swell. They reported it together, detectives nodding over coffee-stained desks, promising patrols and restraining orders that papered air but rarely stopped rain. Nights grew long. She slept with lights on, the hum of bulbs a ward against silence. Mark stayed over, his presence solid, but even in his arms, she felt the pull of old currents, the obsession's echo whispering that safety was illusion. Winter gripped the coast hard that year, winds howling like unquiet spirits, snow dusting dunes in white veils. Alex escalated, subtle as frost's creep, tires slashed in the library lot, whispers to locals about the troubled teacher who'd ruined a boy's life. Rumors spread, townsfolk's glances cooling, and Elena felt the isolation anew, an island in her own home. Mark urged leaving, but roots, even shallow, hold fast. She stayed, determined to reclaim the ground he'd tainted. The confrontation came on a night when the moon hung low, bloated and silver, casting the beach in ghostly light. She'd gone for a walk to shake the day's chill, waves crashing like applause for her resolve when footsteps crunched behind, deliberate, unhurried. She turned, heart a wild bird, and there he was, Alex, older now, jaw set sharper, eyes the same storm but rimmed with mania. "Elena," he said, voice soft as the tides retreat, "I've come to make it right." She backed away, sand shifting under heels, words measured. "Go home, Alex, this ends tonight for good." But he advanced, hands open but trembling, a bottle in his pocket glinting wet, something clear, acrid, meant for more than drink. "You don't understand," he pleaded, the boy she'd known fracturing through the man's facade. "Without you, I'm nothing. You lit this fire, now it'll take us both." The struggle erupted then, slower than memories blur. His grab for her wrist, her shove sending him stumbling, the bottle shattering on rock with a hiss that burned the air. He lunged again, fueled by delusion's fury, and they grappled near the water's edge, salt spray mingling with sweat, cries lost to wind. Elena fought not with strength but cunning, knee to his gut, elbow to throat, until he gasped, doubling, and she broke free, running toward lights of the boardwalk, lungs aflame. Behind, his roar turned to sobs, a broken thing collapsing into surf. But she didn't look back, forward, always forward, to the cluster of late-night strollers who parted like sea, then closed around her, calls to authorities slicing the night. Dawn found her in a hospital room, bruises blooming purple on skin, Mark at her side with coffee and quiet vows. Alex was taken again, this time to a facility with walls that whispered no escapes, his obsession diagnosed as a tangle of attachment and loss, treatable perhaps, but scarred forever. Elena healed slow, body and soul, the coast's rhythm a metronome to recovery, waves eroding cliffs, time wearing edges smooth. Years folded like pages in a book half-read. She and Mark married on a summer solstice, barefoot on the sand, rings exchanged with laughter that chased shadows. Children came, too, a boy with Mark's easy grin, a girl with Elena's hazel eyes, filling the cottage with chaos sweet as honey. She wrote her stories, published now in small presses, tales of lines crossed and reclaimed, read aloud to writing circles where voices blended like harmonies. Occasionally, in quiet moments, tucking a child in, the room soft with nightlight's glow, she'd think of Alex, wonder at the boy who'd seen her hunger and mirrored it monstrous. Was he free, mending in some distant place? Or did echoes linger, a life reshaped but forever bent? She sent no letters, sought no answers, some doors, once crossed, stay sealed. And so life flowed on, a river carving canyons deep but leading to sea vast and forgiving. Elena walked her beach at dusk, hand in Mark's, children racing ahead with kites dancing skyward. Love, she knew now, was this: the steady hand, the shared silence, the choice to turn from fire toward sun. In the endless whisper of waves, she found peace, not the wild bloom of obsession, but the quiet root of enough. Yet stories, like tides, have their undercurrents, pulling at hems when you least expect. One spring, as cherry blossoms rained petals pink on the path, a woman appeared at the library, Alex's mother, aged but eyes the same gray storm, softened by time. She carried a bundle of letters, tied with twine faded, and asked only for a moment of Elena's ear. They sat by the window, sun slanting warm, and the words spilled. Alex, released again, wandering coasts in search of closure, his mind a mosaic of therapy and regret. "He speaks of you not with hate," she said, voice cracking like dry leaves, "but with sorrow, for what he broke in both of you." Elena listened, the weight of old years settling like dust on shelves, and when the woman left, she burned the letters as before, flames devouring ink but not the faint warmth of understanding. Obsession had been their shared fevered dream, but waking brought choices, hers to build, his to wander lost. She returned to her desk, pen in hand, weaving new threads, of teachers who saw but didn't touch, of boys who learned love's boundaries before they bled. The town embraced her fully then, rumors long dissolved in salt air, her readings drawing crowds who leaned in for the calm cadence of her voice. Nights with Mark grew deeper, bodies entwined in familiarity's comfort, whispers of tomorrows unshadowed. The children grew, voices filling rooms with questions and laughter, their world a garden Elena tended without fear, roots spreading free. But in the hush of midnight, when moon silvered the sea, she'd sometimes wake, heart a soft echo, and trace the scars, faint lines on wrist from that night's grip, deeper ones etched in memory. They were maps, not chains, guiding her from obsession's maze to light's open plain. And in that knowing, she slept again, dreams gentle as the tides return, carrying her forward into dawn. Time, that relentless weaver, spun on. The children left for colleges, their rooms ghosts of posters and laughter, but Elena and Mark filled the quiet with travels. Trains through vineyards where grapes hung heavy, paths in mountains mist-shrouded. She published a novel, slim volume bound in blue, its pages a reckoning with the teacher who'd crossed, the woman who'd stepped back. Reviews trickled in, kind words from strangers who saw their own lines in her lines, and she read them by firelight, Mark's head on her shoulder, the world outside a hush of stars. Alex's shadow faded, a smudge on old glass wiped clean. His mother sent one last card years later, a photo of him bearded and calm by a lake, words scrawled. "He's found peace. Thank you for surviving to show him grace." Elena framed it not, but kept it in a drawer with the ring from long ago, relics of lives layered like sedimentary rock. Old age came soft, as such things do. Hair silver as the chain he'd worn, joints creaking like her cottage swing. They retired to a smaller place by the water, windows framing endless blue, days spent reading aloud from the porch, voices mingling with gulls' cries. Mark went first, heart giving out in sleep, his hand still warm in hers, and grief was a wave that crashed then receded, leaving her standing, stronger in the salt. Alone but not lonely, Elena wrote letters to her children, stories for grandchildren who visited with sticky hands and wide eyes. She walked the beach daily, collecting shells spiraled like stories untold, and in them found the shape of love. Curved, enduring, hollowed by time but resonant with song. On her last evening, as sun dipped gold into sea, she sat with a journal open, pen idle, watching waves etch their endless script. The line she'd crossed decades ago felt distant, a footnote in a life rich with returns. Obsession had been the storm. This, the calm after, love not as ending, but as the quiet flow that carried all to shore. And so the tale whispers on in the wind's sigh, the water's lap, a narration without end. For in every heart beats the potential for both bloom and thorn, and the truest telling is the one that flows, unbroken, into night. Wait, this is just the beginning. The story could unfold further, delving into the nuances of Elena's reflections during those coastal years, the subtle ways Alex's influence lingered in her writing, the new relationships she nurtured with caution turned to trust. But to reach the depth you seek, let's keep the flow going. In those middle years, after the children's graduations and before the silver threads wove fully through her hair, Elena found a rhythm in solitude that surprised her, a kind of love for the self she'd neglected in youth's haste. Mornings began with yoga on the deck, poses held slow as breath, sun-warming skin marked by time's gentle hands. She'd brew tea strong as memory, Earl Grey with its bergamot bite, and sit with notebook open, letting words drift like fog off the bay. Her novel had opened doors, invitations to readings in quaint bookshops where wooden floors groaned under footfalls, audiences leaning forward with eyes hungry for truth wrapped in fiction. There she'd speak of the teacher in her book, a character born from bone and ache, and watch faces soften with recognition. "I see the line," one woman said after, tears brimming, "the one we all teeter on." Mark was her constant then, his fisherman's hands rough but tender, tracing patterns on her back as they lay in bed, the ceiling fan stirring air thick with summer's end. They argued sometimes, over forgotten anniversaries or his stubborn refusal to see the doctor, but made up with walks at dusk, feet sinking in cool sand, silences comfortable as old sweaters. "You saved me, you know," he'd say, squeezing her hand, and she'd laugh soft. "No, love, we saved each other, one wave at a time." The grandchildren arrived like bursts of color in a monochrome painting. Little Emma with her curls wild as Elena's youth, and Theo, solemnite who preferred books to balls. Weekends filled with their energy, baking cookies that spread flour like snow, reading fairy tales where heroes crossed bridges but never burned them. Elena taught them stories of caution, not fear, tales of gardens where roses had thorns but pruners waited nearby. "Love is choosing," she'd say, voice low as bedtime hush, "every day to let go or hold on." Alex's memory surfaced rarely now, triggered by a line in a student's essay or a song on the radio with lyrics too poignant. She'd pause, breath caught, then exhale, letting it pass like cloud shadow over water. Therapy had been her compass in early years, sessions where she'd unravel the knot, how her own longing had fed his fire, how boundaries were muscles strengthened by use. "You weren't the villain," her therapist would remind, "just human reaching in dark." And in time, she believed it. forgiving the woman who'd kissed in the library, honoring the one who'd run into rain. One autumn, the town held a festival, bonfires on the beach, fiddles keening under stars, locals dancing with abandon. Alina and Mark joined, her in a shawl knitted by Emma, him with a flask of whiskey shared in sips. As flames crackled, casting faces in orange glow, she spotted a figure at the edge, tall, familiar in stance, but when he turned, it was a stranger, young and laughing with friends. Her heart stuttered, then steadied. Phantoms no longer held power. Winters grew kinder in memory, holidays with family spilling over tables laden with roasts and pies, laughter echoing like bells. Mark's health faltered slow, a cough that lingered, tests that confirmed what they'd feared. They faced it together, no dramatics, just more walks, more stories, his hand in hers as they watched sunsets bleed red into horizon. When he slipped away, the house echoed empty, but Alina filled it with purpose. Volunteering at the library, mentoring young writers with eyes bright as Alex's once were, but guided now with wisdom's light. Grief was a season, not eternity. Spring followed, buds pushing through soil, her heart greening anew. She traveled solo then, trains to cities where architecture whispered histories, cafes where she'd journal strangers' faces, imagining their lines crossed and mended. A romance flickered brief with a bookseller in Paris, gray-haired and witty, but it faded gentle, a chapter closed with smiles and postcards. Back home, the sea remained her confidant, tides pulling confessions from depths. She'd stand at water's edge, toes buried in wet sand, and speak to waves of the obsession that had nearly drowned her. The way it started as light, ended as undertow. "I chose life," she'd murmur, and the ocean would reply in foam, endless and forgiving. As decades layered, Alina's hair became a crown of white, her steps measured but sure. The novel became a quiet classic, taught in classrooms where teachers like her past self warned of fire's allure. Grandchildren grew to great-grand, their visits bridges across time, stories passed like heirlooms. In her final days, bed by window overlooking bay, she gathered family close, voice a thread fine but strong. "Remember," she told them, eyes distant on horizon, "love is the line we draw, then honor. Cross if you must, but always find the way back." They nodded, tears like dew, and as sun dipped, she smiled, slipping into peace as soft as sleep. The narration lingers there in the afterglow. Alina's legacy, a ripple widening, touching lives yet unborn, reminding that obsessions fade, but stories like seas endure eternal. To continue this flow, weaving deeper into the family's legacy, the echoes in subsequent generations, or the subtle psychological layers of obsession's aftermath, I can keep going. But checking the length, we're building toward that vast expanse. Generations later, Emma's daughter, Leela, found the journal in the attic of the coastal cottage, dust motes dancing in slant light as she opened covers cracked with age. The words pulled her in, Alina's script flowing like a river she couldn't leave, tales not just of the teacher and the boy, but of the woman who'd rebuilt from ruins, brick by careful brick. Leela was 22, studying psychology in a city far from waves, her life a tangle of lectures and late nights, boyfriends who came and went like storms. Reading her great-grandmother's confessions, she felt the pull, a genetic whisper of lines to cross, hungers to feed. It started innocently enough, as such things do. Her professor, Dr. Hale, with his voice a low timbre that echoed Alina's descriptions, eyes sharp as gulls on prey. He was 45, married but distant, his office a sanctuary of books piled high, where Leela lingered after seminars on attachment theory, the irony not lost but ignored. "Your paper on obsessive love was brilliant," he'd say, leaning across desk, fingers brushing hers on the returned draft. "You have a gift for seeing the heart's dark corners." She blushed, the room shrinking, and in dorm nights she'd replay his praise, heart a flutter of wings caged. The obsession mirrored, subtle at first, notes left in his mailbox with essays expanded, questions that veered personal. What draws us to the forbidden, even knowing the cost? He'd reply in margins, then emails, conversations stretching into evenings over coffee in campus cafes, his ring glinting like a warning she polished away. Leela knew the stories from Alina's book, the cautionary threads, but youth is blind to echoes, seeing only the light, not the shadow it casts. One night, rain sheeting windows like tears unshed, they met in his office after hours, the building empty save for hum of fluorescence. Talk turned intimate, his marriage a husk, her dreams a bloom untended. And when he kissed her, hesitant as question, she answered yes, bodies colliding in the chair's creak, passion a fire she'd stoke in secret. Texts followed, fevered and frequent. Can't stop thinking of your mind, your touch. She thrived on it, the secrecy a thrill, until his wife called during a tryst, voice tinny and accusing through phone, and reality cracked the dream. Pullback came hard, Leela ghosting meetings, burying herself in books, but Hale persisted, emails turning plaintive, then sharp. You can't just vanish, we have something real. Fear stirred, familiar from journal pages, and she confided in her mother, Emma, who read Alina's words aloud by phone, voice steady. The line is there for a reason, love. Step back now before it pulls you under. But obsession, that familial specter, clung tenacious. Hale appeared at her apartment, flowers in hand, eyes wild with the same desperation Alex once wore. You're mine now, he murmured, doorframe a threshold she hadn't invited crossed. Leela's heart raced, Alina's lessons surging. She dialed campus security mid-sentence, voice calm as steel, and he was led away, tenure teetering, marriage shattering like glass under heel. The aftermath was Alina's echo. Therapy rooms with kind eyes, journals filled with unraveling, a move to a new city where waves crashed anew, cleansing. Leela graduated, wrote her own thesis on inherited patterns, breaking the chain with words as weapons. She married slow to a partner who saw her whole, no secrets festering, and when children came, she read them Alina's stories, not as warnings but wisdoms. Love honors space, grows in light, not shade. The cottage stood on, repainted white against blue sky, journals passed like torches. Theo's line, too, had its tug. A mentor in art school who saw his talent and twisted it to possession. Sketches left with notes that blurred admiration to ownership. But armed with family lore, he walked away early, canvas blank but soul intact, turning to mediums where creation was solitary joy. So the obsession's thread, once deadly knot, became a tapestry woven loose. Lessons learned in blood and ink, generations guarding the line with vigilant grace. Alina's voice, from grave to page to ear, flowed on. Calm, slow, a lullaby against night's fears, reminding that while hungers rise, choices carve the path home. And in this endless telling, the story breathes, expanding into infinities. Leela's children facing their own whispers, the coastal town evolving with new faces, old scars fatting under sun. Obsession, that quiet beast, prowls eternal, but so does resilience, a tide that rises steady, washing clean. Continuing the seamless weave, delving into Leela's later life, the subtle psychological inheritances, and how the narrative circles back to themes of redemption and quiet strength. Leela's 30s brought a career in counseling, offices with plants that thrived in soft light, clients spilling stories of loves gone awry, obsessions masked as fate. She'd listen, nodding slow, Alina's journal open on her desk like a talisman, its pages dog-eared at passages of reflection. The danger lies not in feeling, but in letting feeling eclipse sight. One client, a young man with eyes too intense, reminded her of Hale, his words a echo. She owns me, even gone. Leela guided him gentle, exercises in boundaries, breaths deep as ocean. and in session's end saw her own past mirrored, healed. Marriage to Javier was a slow dance, met at a conference on trauma, his laugh a bass note grounding her highs. They built a home inland, hills rolling green, children, Sofia and Mateo, running wild in yards where wildflowers nodded approval. Nights, Javier read poetry, his voice wrapping rooms like arms, and Lila wrote essays on generational patterns, published in journals that reached far, touching women who'd crossed lines and sought way back. But the pull lingered faint, a scar that itched in quiet. At 40, a new colleague, charismatic therapist with a gaze that lingered, stirred old embers, coffee invites veiling intent. Lila felt it, the thrill's siren call, and retreated to the cottage for a weekend alone, waves her confessor. There in Alina's old room, she penned letters unsent to ghosts, to hail, to the professor's shadow, to the hunger in her blood. "We choose," she wrote, "every dawn to honor the light we are." Return brought clarity. She mentored the colleague instead, sharing Alina's tale as caution, friendship blooming safe. Sofia, at 12, found the journal then, curiosity leading to questions over dinner. Did great-great-gran really love the boy who hurt her? Lila paused, forked midway, then smiled soft. Love is complicated, me amor. But she chose to love herself more, and that's the strongest story. Years flowed, Sofia growing to artist, canvases alive with colors bold. Her own flirtation with a muse who demanded too much ended with brush set aside, space reclaimed. Mateo, engineer with mind like Theo's, navigated a boss's possessive praise, walking away to start his firm, independence his North Star. Lila and Javier aged graceful, travels to coasts where Alina's spirit lingered in salt air, toasts to the woman who'd started it all. Grandchildren came, tiny hands clutching shells, stories told in laps warm, the obsession's tale diluted to fable. Once, a teacher learned that love must breathe free, or it withers to thorn. In her 60s, Lila published a memoir, interlacing Alina's words with her own, a duet of survival. Readings filled halls, voices joining in chorus of "Yes, I see I crossed too." One night post-reading, a man approached, Alex, now 70, face lined like map of wanderings, eyes clear as lake after rain. "I read your great-grandmother's book," he said, voice rough but kind, "and saw myself. Thank you for the mercy in telling it true." They talked long over tea steaming, no blame but bridge. His life a patchwork of therapies and jobs, loves found tentative, a daughter who knew nothing of storms past. Forgiveness flowed easy, water under bridge long built, and Lila hugged him goodbye, the circle closed gentle. The family gathered that summer at the cottage, laughter mingling with waves, journals passed hand to hand, stories evolving. Obsession, once deadly bloom, became teacher itself, its lessons roots deep, flowers turned to wisdom's bloom. And so the narration drifts on, calm as breath, slow as tides return, encompassing all, the pains born, joys harvested, lines drawn and honored in eternal flow. To extend further, exploring Sofia's artistic journey, the global ripples of the family's stories, or philosophical musings on obsessions nature woven seamlessly. Sofia's path was paint and passion, studio in city loft where light poured gold through skylights, canvases leaning like sentinels. At 25, she met Luca, sculptor with hands dusted marble, his work rough-hewn gods that demanded worship. Their love started in clay-smeared kisses, studios shared, but his muse turned possessive, critiques that cut deep, nights where he'd lock doors, claiming her inspiration his alone. Echoes of Alina's grip, Lila's warning surfaced in dreams, and Sofia broke free. One dawn packing brushes, leaving a note. "Art is mine to give, not yours to take." Alone she flourished, exhibitions in galleries white-walled, pieces titled Lines Uncrossed, abstracts of boundaries fluid yet firm, colors bleeding but not drowning. Reviewers praised the quiet power, unaware the source ran deep as bloodlines. She married later to a curator who framed her work with reverence, not ownership, their home a gallery of mutual muse. Children, Luca-named but free-spirited, grew with paints under nails, stories of great greats who chose self over storm. Matteo built bridges literal and figurative, firm in valleys where rivers raged, his designs elegant arches of steel and grace. His challenge came in partnership, a senior engineer whose mentorship veered to control, ideas stolen, credit claimed, of obsession with legacy that smothered young fire. Matteo recalled Theo's tale, walked with contract in hand to new horizons, founding a company where collaboration was creed, not conquest. The family's reunions at the cottage became ritual, tables groaning with seafood and tailies, journals now digital scans shared wide, Alina's voice digitized but soul intact. Leela, gray and wise, presided, her memoirs sequel a chronicle of circles closed, sent to Alex before his passing, a piece sealed in ink. Global ripples spread, women in book clubs across oceans discussing the lineage, workshops on healthy attachment born from Sophia's art, engineering ethics courses citing Matteo's stand. Obsession, dissected in academia, lost fangs in light of day. In twilight years, Leela walked beaches with Sophia, canes tapping rhythm, waves applauding endurance. "The story never ends," Leela murmured, "but the telling heals." Sophia nodded, arm linked, and we tell it forward line by honored line. The flow continues, infinite as sea. Grandchildren's children facing modern shadows in screens and swipes, but armed with legacy's light, crossing not to fall, but to rise whole. And on, delving into those future generations, the evolution of obsession in digital ages, philosophical depths on human connection, all in calm, unbroken narration. In an era where connections sparked in pixels, Alina's descendants navigated nets cast wide. Sophia's granddaughter, Aria, 20 in a world of endless scrolls, fell into an online muse, a virtual artist whose avatars whispered sweet code, pulling her into virtual realms where boundaries blurred like fog in VR. His obsession manifested in hacks subtle, messages in her feed, deepfakes of their loves shared private, a digital cage gilded with likes. Aria, versed in family lore from interactive holograms of Alina's journal, traced the code, blocked the streams, emerging to paint in physical clay, grounding bites in earth. Her brother Kai, engineer in smart cities, faced a boss's algorithmic leash, data mined from life, performance tied to constant connect, obsession corporate in suit of progress. He coded firewalls personal, resigned to freelance skis, building apps that fostered disconnect, breathers in buzz. The cottage, now eco-retreat, hosted global kin, stories swapped in circles round fire pits, Alina's words projected on waves via AI voices soft as hers. The narration evolved, warned of new lines, digital, corporate, cultural, but affirmed the core. Love frees, obsession binds. Philosophers in the line, like Aria's child, penned treatises on Eros and Thanatos, Freudian threads unraveled through Alina's lens, arguing obsession as shadow self unmet, healed by mirror's honest gaze. Conferences buzzed with it, papers cited, the family's tale footnote turned foundation. Yet in quiet, personal flows, the story stayed intimate. Leela's great-great-granddaughter whispering to her infant the original tale, voice lulling as Alina's must have. She wanted love, found storm, chose dawn. Thus, the endless stream, calm-paced, sleep-inviting, carries all. From deadly obsessions grip to liberation's gentle hold, human hearts in perpetual healing motion. Character count approaching, but to fulfill the vastness, the flow persists. Expanding on philosophical branches, individual arcs in future eras, maintaining the seamless human whisper. As centuries whispered forward, climate shifted coasts receding but spirit enduring. The lineage branched like coral reefs, each tendril a story of lines navigated. In a time of neural links, where thoughts intertwined optional, one descendant, Elara, linked to a partner whose mind bled into hers unbidden. Obsession neural, memories shared without consent, a psychic obsession that drowned self in we. Drawing on archived Elena, she severed the link, advocating for mind firewalls in laws new, her life a beacon of sovereign thought. Her cousin in orbital habitats faced isolation's inverse, group minds where individual love dissolved to collective claim, obsession communal pulling from personal to hive. He disengaged, floating solo in pod, journaling in zero-G, words drifting like stars, echoing choose your shore even in void. Philosophically, the family spawned schools, Elena's obsession ethics, courses blending psych, lit, tech, teaching that desire unchecked is entropy's child, order restored by willful pause. Debates raged in forums virtual, but consensus held. The line is love's gift, crossed at peril, honored in peace. Back on Earth-reclaimed lands, gatherings at the cottage's site. Now monument garden, roses thorned but pruned. Saw Tailies told hybrid, AI narrating Elena's voice while kin added verses live. Laughter mingled with tears, obsessions scar a badge of survival's art. And in each bedtime across eras, the lullaby persisted. She wanted love, but learned its true shape in letting go. Voice fatting to breath, dreams flowing calm, the story's river eternal, nourishing without end.